I'm Phoebe, and everything here I either DIY'd or thrifted or both. So if you want to find out how I did it, keep watching. I've been so inspired by this store called Olive Ateliers in LA. It's such a cool concept and I really love the giant olive trees. I feel like that really reminds me of Puglia in Italy is filled with olive farms, basically. Very sort of Mediterranean, European, that's what it kind of reminds me of. So I really like the aesthetic of that, and I've been wanting to try and make some things that are inspired by it for a while now. I just saw a video the other day by a girl called Cassie. She really inspired me. I wanted to make a whole collection of things. I wanted to try and basically just like see what I can do with this concept. I already have some pieces in my home that are kind of in the theme of that style anyway. In particular, I'm thinking about my console table in our entryway. That's very much the type of thing that you get there. I bought that on, I think, eBay for £30, so that was really cheap though. I know that benches like that go for a lot more at Olive Ateliers. So throughout this, I think I'm going to collect things from around my home and see if I can find any things, you know, thrifted, whatever, and most importantly, try to DIY some myself. So there's a few finishes I specifically really am interested in trying. So there is that black washed out, I don't even know how to describe it, but that black look with sort of a whitewash on top. I really want to try that. Then also I want to do some faux terracotta with like an aged sort of white washing on it as well. And then I'm really interested in just that generic sort of dark, rustic, aged vessel look. And the other thing that I'm very interested in that is a bit different is the limestone. I think I can try to recreate and make like a faux limestone out of expanding foam and paint. I think I can do it. So I'm gonna try all of those things. So first things first is my vessels. What have I got?
So these are just a few of the vessels that I started with. I actually collected more as this project went on. I couldn't help myself. I was really just looking for things that were interesting shapes that I thought had potential.
And then I went to the hardware store because I wanted some bigger ones. So I got this big plastic planter, and then I also got this one. So I think these have got potential to do interesting things. So I've got my vessels, and I know the finishes. I just need to decide how I'm going to match them up.
So for the blackish effect, I collected my vessels and then I actually put the paint into one of the vessels because, like, why bother if I'm going to paint it anyway, you know? So I added the corn flour and I stirred it with a stick that I found in the garden, and it was really slow, so I should have just used a proper stirrer, but whatever. I got there in the end. And then I just started painting it on. I found myself wondering if chalk paint would have just done the same thing as this mixture, but I've never used chalk paint before, so I don't really know. But I must say I'm really happy with how this turned out, so I really do recommend this mixture if you can be bothered to mix it. So then I just painted a few of the other vessels that I had, just as like a base coat, even though, say, for this one, I knew that I wanted to cover it in plaster. Also, painting the inside first is the worst idea. This was a terrible idea. You should actually put your hand inside it and paint the outside while you hold the inside, because the inside probably only needs one coat and like it's all a bit loose on the inside, whereas it's the outside that you want to do a proper first coat and a proper second coat and maybe a third coat, but you need it properly covered, the outside. So that's where the attention should be, and that's where the attention should start, on the outside, not the inside. So this is what they were looking like after the first coat, and I have to be honest, I was underwhelmed, to say the least. They did start to look a bit better when they were dry, but I was still not that excited by it. But I just was reminding myself, this is just the base coat, this is just the start. Don't count your chickens until they hatch, you know? So I definitely needed to fix the pattern imprinted onto this pot because it just wasn't the right vibe. And so I just used a little bit of plaster and I smoothed it straight across it. And I wasn't too worried, to be honest, about like how scrappy it was. It was actually easier having the black painted because I could really easily see where I was going. But it didn't matter if it was a bit rustic because like that's the whole vibe we're going for. So I just let it be loose and just, you know, decided as long as I'm filling in those little holes, if it's a bit smudgy along the edges, who cares? Let's just call this part of the artistic effect, you know? For this project, I had a few paint colors that I used. I got these cream and brown colors and basically just mixed them together as I kept layering in different combinations and didn't worry if it looked different because that kind of added interest to it. I think you can get really any combination of ones that you might already have. So I got a clean paintbrush. I dipped it just a tiny little bit in the paint, only a small bit, and then dipped it in water. And this created a really watery effect. Each time I went back and dipped the brush into that watery mixture, I think it got better and better because you really just want like a translucent watery effect, not really like paint at all. You just want like a hint of paint. So the more watery, I think, the better. But it is really forgiving. So I was able to get a paper towel and just dab off the extra paint to make it look like there was less paint there. So if you do get the mixture wrong and you're too heavy-handed with the paint and don't have your mixture watery enough, you can still fix it. And so that's what I did. I just did like whatever with rubbing it. I dabbed it some places. I did it side to side in other places. I was just like going with the flow, whatever, you know. And I was also just being a bit lazy, just like whatever was easiest. You can see that my rubbing actually chipped off some of the paint and you can see the original color showing through. But that was fine too because I was able to just add a bit more black paint and then come in and do another layer. So like it's really, really forgiving. And as you can see on this one, the mixture was a lot more watery and I think that it made this one look a lot better. So I definitely got better at this and improved my technique as I continued with it. So while this dries, let me fill you in on where I'm at with the limestone project. There definitely are better plastic bins out there, but I just chose the best one and the best size I could get at the hardware store. So it was pretty straightforward. I just got expanding foam and I sprayed with water beforehand. I first learned about that in my disco ball project. I'll link that below. But this didn't require much technique. You literally just fill the bucket with expanding foam. Then I just got this little thing. This wasn't ideal, but it's just what I had. I added a few little paint tins just to weigh it down while it set. I probably should have put a little bit more weight in this, I think. But when I came back, it had expanded so much. And like I knew it was expanding foam, obviously, but like I just didn't expect it to do that. Anyway, so it was fairly easy to remove the center thing, and you can see there the mold of it. It's got potential. I found the easiest way to remove it from the bucket was to use this stick. It was mostly about like the suction, I think. So I was just shoving it down and just separating it out. And that's all it really needed because it's not stuck to the plastic. It's just like suctioned in there sort of. So it was a little bit tedious, but I just gradually kept going and each time it sort of separated more and got easier and easier. And then it just eventually came out. And I was pretty happy with it. It's obviously the right size for what I'm trying to copy. Still quite like shiny and man-made, but I was gonna fix that. So I just cut off those shapes that weren't very natural and just did it with a bread knife. It's really easy to do, but I just did it really carefully and just shaved it down. And I took a lot of care in this point because I know that this is really gonna be the difference between it looking good and not. So I sanded it. It still was very rough, but I just kept going. And anytime I saw really like a man-made looking surface, I just took that knife, took the sander, smoothed it down, and I made sure to try to make it also sometimes uneven because that's what it would look like if it was natural. So I took off those big real bubbly bits that exploded over, and then I worked really carefully on the edges because I know that that's what you'll look at. There were some large bubbles in the foam and I decided to incorporate them and sort of just went with whatever was going on and sliced off bits accordingly. I found a few little weak spots and so I would remove them as well because I didn't want any flaky sort of bits. And I just kind of went with the shapes and I liked using the corner of the sanding block to like make a little streak in it sort of. This sort of motion, leaving that line, if it were a real limestone block, it would have been cut to some degree. So there would be some lines like that. Then I just started with this sort of stone colored paint and I just went all over it. I actually don't think I did this in the right order. I think I should have spray painted it black because you want to get colors into those deep nooks and crannies because that's where like dirt would be. I actually did this color and then I came in with a dark green paint that almost looked grayish blackish, but it was a dark green. And I just, with a makeup brush, I just filled in all of the bits where like dirt would be. And because of the expanding foam, it has all these little holes in it. I would like stick the brush in and really get in there so that it looked really dark and dirty in there. I think it'd be easier to do with spray paint because spray paint would probably naturally get into all of those places, and then you could add the lighter colors on top. But I got there, I just sort of smoothed it around. I did it while the other paint was still a little bit wet so that I could sort of blend it in and get a bit like messy, really. And that definitely worked well. And after I added a little bit more of a lighter green, this is what it was looking like. If I'm honest, when I was looking at this, I was thinking, this looks really like dingy and dirty. But it's like, well, that's what my goal was. I was trying to make this look like a rock. I don't know why I was so bothered by that. I had another look at the inspiration image that I had for this, and I realized that I had really gone really down a path of this like rustic, moldy, dirty thing that was starting to remind me of something that had like washed up from the ocean. Actually, when I looked at the image that I originally had been inspired by, it really didn't look this dirty. But I still consider this to be a success because while it doesn't look like the inspiration image that I originally picked, it does look like a rock. It looks like I pulled it out of the ocean. In that way, it's a success because I made something completely like man-made and it's foam, you know? But I still haven't even mentioned my faux terracotta project. I wanted to try to make this plastic planter look like it was made out of terracotta. I had a stroke of luck and I came across this tin of unopened Faro and Ball paint at the charity shop for £5. Normally that's the price that you pay for a tiny little sample tin. So that was quite a deal, and it worked out well because it was this like reddish primer color, which was perfect for my terracotta experiment. So yep, I stirred this one with the stick as well. It didn't do a very good job of stirring it, so don't be lazy, just go and get a proper thing that's gonna stir it, especially because this paint really did need a lot of stirring. It looks like it's a light pink color here, but it actually was a bit darker. It just needed a lot of stirring. So you really have to trust the process with this one. I was just literally putting on a base coat knowing that I'd have to do a couple of coats because this paint's not meant to be painted onto plastic. Now, because this pot was so lightweight, it actually was a little bit wobbly to paint. I ended up putting a tin of paint in it, and that really helped give it some stability while I painted it. So that's definitely a good little top tip for you. I specifically wanted to try some really large planters for this project because that's a really big thing that you notice with the Olive Atelier aesthetic, that they have these huge, big, heavy urns and pots. And the bigger the size, I think, the bigger the impact, especially because this is a plastic pot that, by making it look terracotta, makes it appear more substantial and heavy and have more of an impact. So I definitely saw some improvement as I did my second coat. It was starting to really cover up and start to look like a solid color. But I still was doubting it at this point because I wasn't too happy with the fact that it was really just looking like an apricot pink color. And that wasn't really what I was wanting. But just like with the black vessels, I was just trusting the process, and I'm really glad I did. So as my vessels were drying outside, I knew that I had a few bits of stone and things in my garden, and I wanted to go and have a look around because why not try and find things that truly are rustic and aged and organic. So I went for a little walk around just to see what I could find. And at the moment we're having our rockery removed. There were all these parts of the rockery there. And so I just had a little look at like the moss growing on it and the textures just for inspiration, just to see if it gives me any ideas. So I went right down to the wild section of the garden, and at the moment it's completely covered in snowdrops, and soon the Spanish bluebells will come out as well. It's pretty incredible. It's like a field of snowdrops. But I knew that in this back corner, I knew that there were a few terracotta pots. But then I also started noticing this rotting wood and these tree stumps, and I didn't ever really consider how much inspiration there is for projects just in my garden. So I'm just going to keep all these things in mind and maybe come up with something that I could do with them one day. I don't know yet though. I also don't really know what to do with these terracotta pots because they're not actually pots. They don't have a bottom on them. They're actually really kind of like little chimneys. So there's this big one that's all overgrown with ivy, and then there are these smaller ones. Surely I can do something with them. So if you have any ideas, please leave a comment below. I'm so interested to know what I could do with them. I just know they've got potential for something. I just don't know what. I'm gonna keep thinking about it, but meanwhile, I have to start my next project. So I liked the idea with expanding foam that you can make any shape that you want. And so it's always really hard for me to find something really long and thin just for the mantle on the fireplace where our TV is. I thought that this could be a good solution to that, to create a really long, narrow thing, do that stone effect again, and fill it with moss. I thought that that could be a little bit interesting. So just like before, I painted it, but this time I used the black color first. I found that watering down the paint made it a lot easier to sort of smush it into all of those little holes. So then I just continued much like the previous one, where I just lay it on different colors over and over again. I'm not good at drawing or painting or anything like that, but I think that someone who is would do a really good job of this, a lot better than I would do. But I feel like I got there in the end, especially from far away. It's definitely one that looks better from far away than up close. So then I'm moving on to the other aged vessel technique that I wanted to do. I started off with the intention of putting on a layer of brown and dabbing it off and wiping it around and then adding another colour. But it didn't take long for this to completely devolve into a kind of frantic psychosis of looking at ones that were finished, picking up another, putting the brush in a different colour, pushing it around, getting it all over my fingers, using dry paper, using wet paper, using this colour, using that colour, mixing them together, painting black over it again. I lost the plot, I think. Even now, I kind of want to go back and make more changes because I do think I was missing like a yellowy, tan, brownish colour. So you might see the revisions of this in part 2 of this video. So I knew this glass vessel had potential, but I wanted to make a change to its shape. So I painted on a base layer and then I added some air dry clay around the top. I put it around the top and then I just smoothed it down into the original shape to make it look like it continued. And then I brought up the top to make it just like an organic shape, which is really forgiving, of course. So I just kept smoothing it down. It took a little bit, but I was just patient with it. I wasn't too worried when there were marks of like fingerprints and things because that kind of added to the organic look of it. And then for the top, I just used the end of this paintbrush to pat down the top so that it just thickened a little bit and didn't look so flimsy at the top. It just sort of gave it a bit more substance. Now to make this look come together, I knew that I needed olive trees, of course. They really are a classic Mediterranean vibe of a plant and I just love them, so any excuse to buy plants, I take it. I've also noticed that Olive Ateliers often use lavender. I chose some beautiful French lavender, but if you're unable to get olive trees or lavender, a good alternative that's also really affordable is rosemary. The foliage on it has that sort of greyish, greenish colour that lavender and olive trees both have. And it definitely has that Mediterranean vibe about it. So, we're almost done, but I hear you asking, Phoebe, what about that other big pot? You haven't mentioned it. And that's because it's not finished. I wanted to find a way to reshape it, and so I'm still in the middle of that project. But don't worry, I'm working on a part 2 of this video so you can see how that one turns out. And I'm already working on a bunch of other ideas I have for part 2. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on the second part of this project. But in the meantime, it's time to show you what I have done so far. Are you ready to see what it looks like when I pull all of the items together?